Since 1972, the McIlvaney Financial Group has been a conservative, contrarian investment firm. With that mindset, they have created a multifaceted approach to portfolio management, offering a wide array of services including wealth management, a unique short fund, hedging through precious metals, and excellent educational resources. We have had David McIlvaney on our show multiple times because we respect his outlook, viewpoints, and recommendations. You really need to let them give you a much better understanding of what true portfolio diversification is. Just go to McIlvaney.com/Main Street, with Main Street all spelled out, to get introduced and to garner free information. Again, that's McIlvaney.com/Main Street to schedule your free 20-minute consulting session. Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burak of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. He's written more than 7 investing books, including Red Alert, How China's Growing Prosperity Threatens the American Way of Life, The Coming Economic Collapse, and The Oil Factor. He has a new book coming out soon about China and gold. He's the founder and research chairman of the Leeb Group, which publishes an extensive line of financial newsletters reaching more than 200,000 readers. He's a chief investment officer and investment committee chairman of Leeb Capital Management, and he's worked in the financial industry for decades, including Investing Daily, where I used to work, and the parent company Capital Information Group as a chief investment officer. Stephen Leeb, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, Jason. Thank you for having me.
And yeah, that's Dr. Stephen Leeb. You have a bunch of degrees as well in math and psychology and business and economics. Yes.
Hopefully, I'm putting them to good use.
Well, I want to spend most of this interview talking about China and commodities. So let's talk about the Chinese economy. Do you think China is successfully transitioning from an export growth economy to more of a consumer-driven economy?
I definitely do. I think that a lot of what's known about China's economy is basically not very accurate. I mean, for years, you haven't seen too much talk about this lately, Jason, but for years, everyone talked about China overstating their economy and their economic growth. When the folks at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which is a very reputable research organization in the United States, sat down and put pen to paper and really started analyzing this, they came up with a conclusion that really is shocking. They determined that, if anything, China had been systematically understating their growth. Understating it. And most of this understatement had occurred in the area of consumption. Now, one place where they looked, and the figures are right there, is retail sales. You can't find, maybe you can find 3 months, I have a chart right in front of me, maybe you can find 3 months in the last 5 or 6 years where retail sales were not double digits. And when they weren't double digits, they were like 9.8%. You can't grow retail sales consistently faster than the overall economy, and a lot faster than the overall economy, and still have consumer. World Bank now says that consumption's about 37%, I think, of the GDP. That's ridiculous. It's got to be a lot higher than that. They're understating, systematically have been understating, and this is not speculation from me. I really want to make that clear. Again, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Anyone can go to the internet, can find all the studies that they've done on this. Morgan Stanley, another company, another name I think people will recognize, had estimates that China was understating their GDP by as much as 30%. And what fits here, Jason, is that China is a long civilization. They have a civilization that goes back millennials, many thousands of years. And in the history of this civilization, there's one well-known statement that shows up. I think it was originally part of The Art of War, and that statement is, Deng basically used it, and he said, "Show your weaknesses." And don't show your weaknesses and bide your time. Don't show your strengths. I'll get it straight. Don't show your strengths and bide your time. China's comfortable with us and everybody else thinking that they're not doing particularly well, or as well as they're doing, because who'll worry about them. Now, at this point, circa 2017, basically the jig is up. I mean, now people cannot deny that China is doing extremely well. And that, retail sales, despite the talk of a massive slowdown that we've seen over the past couple of years, retail sales have continued, as I said, to grow at double-digit rates. Consumption is very likely more than 50% of the economy, and the economy is very likely still considerably understated, how big their economy is. Yes, I think that they're operating according to plan. I don't think that there's really no hard evidence to suggest that they aren't. Let me put it that way. And there's a lot of hard evidence to suggest their economy is considerably stronger than has been reported. So I think that they're making the transition, and I think they're doing it in a very effective way.
That's very interesting. Yeah, we know that they have 5-year plans, and their plans are a lot different than what people in the West do, what governments in the West do. Things are very myopic here in the United States with the government. It's on an election cycle, if that. And you have Congress turning over, the president turning over. So everything's, the politicians are going to promise people things now, but that's not really the way China thinks when they're planning things out for their economy.
You couldn't. I could not. Never have said it better. And I've been studying this thing intensely for hour after hour for the last 4, 5, or 6 years. And yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, to give one example, China in the late 70s. I mean, when Deng first took power and Mao left, etc., and they were becoming a semi-market economy. They decided they needed gold. And at that point, I think that they were mining about 6 tons of gold a year or less. They took a part of their army and devoted it to finding all the gold deposits and doing some of the dredging throughout China. Make a long story short, China today, despite the fact that they don't have massive gold reserves, are the largest gold-producing country in the world. They now produce close to 500 tons of gold a year, maybe 450, something in that vicinity. 20% of their reserves they produce every year. I mean, they add to their reserves, so that's why they can continue to do it. But they're producing a lot of gold right now at a major loss. And again, it's because of forward thinking. They want to accumulate as much of this as they can. And the point that I'm trying to make is that they started this program in 1978. It wasn't like a 5-year program. It wasn't a 10-year program. It was more than I think almost a 2-generational program, or at least more than one generation. And so it goes with most of their economic planning. I mean, this whole business about these so-called ghost cities, you don't hear people talking about the ghost cities anymore. The reason being is that many of these ghost cities were designed with a 20-year perspective in mind. They were designed to be parts of huge metropolises, huge, massive, what I would call megapolises. I mean, Beijing and Shanghai are both going to be hubs for cities that are urban areas that are possibly as much as 100 million people. What an edge that gives you. I mean, you've got 100 million people, a lot easier to fit skill sets to jobs, etc. But this kind of planning, this wasn't 5-year planning. This wasn't even 10-year planning. This was, again, generational planning. And that's the kind of planning that they'll talk about 5-year plans and their 5-year goals, but, underlying those 5-year goals is sort of like a meta goal where they want to be 20 or 30 years from now. And it's very, very interesting to watch them in a way. And I wish we could take, an important lesson. But you nailed it. I mean, our Congress turns over every 2 years. I mean, you've got to be right. If Trump doesn't get stuff passed, all of a sudden the guys that are there, in 2018, every single House member is going to be reelected. You'll have a major change. China, for better or worse, I think for worse, I mean, I don't want to make political judgments, but I don't care for their political system at all. But this is a major advantage that they have. But I think we could be there. And if you look at how well this country performed after World War II, that was a golden era. I mean, there we were foresightful. I mean, I'm old enough to say that I remember, my parents lecturing and saying that it's a good thing to save and save for the future. That is how you build a country. That's how you build your own nest egg. And everybody in the 50s, 50s I don't remember that well, but even the 60s, probably up to, I don't know, in the 70s things started to go downhill. And there's no doubt by the mid-1970s we were thinking we've got to succeed here and now. And you being part of this investment community, sometimes our time frames here are literally nanoseconds. If you look at some of these quantitative trading algorithms that take place, Brown wrote one of his books on these flash boys. Yes, nanosecond edges. China's looking 20 years ahead. They're looking at doing things that are going to be productive and going to allow for transitions that are going to, come again in the next generation and more. So it's we're up against it, and we've got to realize that we've got to do the same kind of thing and the same kind of long-term planning. I think that they're doing a pretty good job. I don't necessarily wish them well, but they are doing a very good job.
I've interviewed Dan Collins, who he's lived in mainland China for over 15 years. He actually was a General Motors employee, and he moved there when General Motors started moving, a lot of their manufacturing over to China. So he was from Detroit. He was from the Michigan area. He didn't know any Mandarin Chinese. He had to learn it on the fly. And, he says about the Go Cities, since he still lives there, that the Go Cities, the mainstream media in the United States and Europe won't report on this, but 3 to 5 years later, a lot of those Go Cities that you've seen on TV, on 60 Minutes and other channels, they're full. So he says they don't fill up right away. It just takes them a few years, and then the people move in.
Right. If you want to get people into these cities and make them part of these giant megapolises, you don't build them on the fly. They have to be. You have to have a place to move. You can't tell people, well, move over here and we'll build a city. You have to have the city in place, and then people can move. You've got to put the horse before the cart, and that's exactly what they've done. And I'm glad to hear that your previous interviewee, or the interviewee that you're talking about, that from General Motors, and congratulations, he did something I could never do, which is learn Mandarin, especially on the fly. I'm lucky that I can speak English, but he basically nailed it, totally nailed it, and that's exactly how the Chinese think. And the fact that he also went on to say that it's not reported in the West, that's very true. I can think of one reporter that has written a couple of books on it, and his name slips my mind, but you can, go to the internet and look it up. I think he blogged for maybe Forbes, I can't remember. But yes, it was eye-opening. He made these travels all through China and said, he said all these cities are juxtaposed to other metropolises like Beijing, like Shanghai, like, a lot of unpronounceable names for me. But yes, this was by design. Your excuse me, your interviewee was extremely perceptive, exceptionally perceptive on both levels, what they're doing and how poorly it's reported in the West. China should be the center of what we're doing. Trump had the right idea, but he's gotten, a little bit distracted. China is a threat, and China does undercut us, and China does do things that are, not particularly, not particularly things that I like.
Immoral, with their government.
Yes. They do things. Well, let me just say they're for China. They do things very pragmatically, and if they can get away with it, they'll get away with it. And we're as long as we don't report on what they're doing, and how well they're doing it, we're not going to be up to correcting our own ways of doing things and emulating them in a certain way, nor are we going to be up to taking the kinds of stands we have to take with respect to China. I actually think it's probably a little bit too late at this point for us in many ways. That doesn't mean that I think we're condemned to a lower or civilizational collapse. But I think that we've ceded a tremendous amount of authority and world leadership to China, and it's not just recently because of Trump. It's been going on for the last, I don't know, certainly since 2001, when they entered the World Trade Organization.
Yeah, I was gonna cite that too. Yeah, and I think they've kicked the United States' ass securing long-term supply of natural resources.
They totally have. I mean, I think you and I were talking. I mean, but just briefly, magnetism. I mean, and I'm not speaking as a physicist. I'm speaking as someone who just reads about this stuff, and can cite a few true facts. Magnetism is a very important part of free energy. It's once you have a permanent magnet in place, you have basically a permanent source of energy in place. For decades, every decade, we'd find some material that would double the ability to develop magnetism. It would double the strength of the magnetism that we could develop, the permanent magnets. That stopped around 1980, 1990, with the discovery of heavy rare earths, which are now, everybody agrees, are considered by far the best and most powerful permanent magnets in the world. And they're necessary, not, for a lot of our modern technology, for a lot of our defense, etc. And they're also necessary, we were talking about, I think Tesla before. They're necessary for electric engines. To build an efficient EV engine, you need permanent magnets. Now, Tesla's been forced to substitute, Jason, I think it's what's called an induction engine, which is not as efficient. China, by contrast, can use permanent magnets, make a more efficient, less expensive engine. I mean, that's just one example, but it's also true with missiles. With the most advanced technology, you need permanent magnets. If you have a computer in front of you, there'll be some permanent magnets. We have these deposits in this country of permanent magnets. I mean, not permanent, permanent
the stuff that goes
elements.
Into them,
Yes, the elements. We're not doing a thing to develop them. Nothing. And in fact, whenever Molycorp had an ore deposit of permanent of rare earth elements. They're called that. The generic name is rare earth elements. Most of them are not rare, but the parts, the heavy ones, are the ones that are used for permanent magnets, and they are rare. And Molycorp was trying to develop their ore body. It wasn't a great ore body from the point of view of being having heavy rare earths, but it was an ore body. But guess what? Once they got the ore, they had to send it to China to be processed, because not only does China dominate the ore body, their heavy rare earth elements are, their endowment of rare earth elements are probably greater than any other country. But they've mastered the 8-level supply chain, which will take an ore body and sort out the heavy rare earths from the lighter rare earths and turn that into a product. No one else can do that, just the Chinese. And how long have they been thinking about that? Well, Deng, again, going back to Deng, I don't know how many years he's been dead, but I would imagine at least 20. One of the comments that he made about 20 years ago was, well, yeah, the Saudis or the Middle East has oil, but we have rare earths. I mean, again, he's looking 20 years ahead as to when these things will be really, really valuable. And he was right now. I mean, and that's why I think China's making gains on us militarily. I mean, if you want a military budget of 60 or 70 billion, okay, maybe you can make an argument for it. But unless you have unless you have access to the most important elements that you need, or to elements that are critical for an advanced military, you could spend $1 trillion, and you're not going to get the most advanced equipment. And that's a big deal. That scares me.
Well, Stephen, for that advanced military equipment, I think, some of it, at least parts of it, was still being outsourced by U.S. military companies in China. They were hiring Chinese manufacturers to manufacture parts of it, and hoping that, the Chinese government doesn't figure out all the different suppliers and put all the plans together. I think that had been going on for a while.
Okay, Jason, I hope you're right. I had not heard that before. all I can say is I really hope you're right, because I don't have the quotes in front of me, but I've written about this, where we've done white papers, and the admiral or general in charge of research said that if you don't have access to the entire periodic table, this is almost a quote, you're basically going to have a military that is dated in the late 1970s. It's not going to be any more advanced than it was in the late 1970s. So I really hope you're right about that. I really do, and I hope the Chinese never find out about it. I hope we just continue to pull the wool over their eyes. But better than that would be like you take a company like Avalon, which is in Canada. It's in Nowheresville, and they have a major deposit of rare earth elements, and a lot of those elements in that deposit are heavy elements. And that could be developed. It would take a Manhattan Project to do it, but it would employ a lot of people. What better way to employ a lot of people? And developing, the educational facilities. We don't teach anything about rare earth engineering in this country. I mean, this is what we need to be doing. And I don't see any indication that we are. None whatsoever.
I want to transition now to some of the Chinese technology companies, the larger ones like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. Do you think they're doing well both in China and globally as they gain market share against larger U.S. tech companies in foreign markets? And do you think these companies are good long-term investments? Or do you think China will keep preventing more of a free market playing field, making it harder for U.S. technology companies to compete in China?
I think that, it's a many-part question. I think, I think the anagram, our anagram is FANG. Now there's a double A for Apple and Amazon. Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. Their anagram is BAT, as you named it, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. They have a tremendous amount of room to grow just within China. And certainly if you add the other developing world, other parts of the developing world to the mix, massive growth potential, even though I think each of them has, been, except for Baidu, they've stumbled the last 2 years, but by and large, each of them have tremendous past growth rates. And I'm not sure that these companies will really ever make a major, be able to penetrate Western markets. I know Tencent tried with, I think, their WeChat, which was their premier product. They tried to make inroads in Europe, and they got nowhere. I mean, these language barriers are very difficult. I know one individual that uses the Tencent, social media chat vehicle, which has been, a miracle in China, and he happens to be Chinese. So it really has not been it's not been an easy haul, and I think similarly, it's not easy. Won't be easy for the U.S. to make inroads into China. And again, I think most of the reason. I mean, I'm just thinking about this now, and again, this is repressive. They're very repressive. I don't think that they're so much scared of the competition from a company like Facebook, from Google, etc. Because there are the language barriers, and there's loyalty to home brands, etc., etc. I think that what worries them is that they don't have control of the news, and they don't have control of what's disseminated in these internet companies, and they're all internet related. But I think that Apple, for instance, is doing okay, or has been doing okay in China, because they agreed to their censorship policies. But companies like Starbucks, they've been turning in an incredible performance in China. I mean, they just figured out how to adapt to the culture. But they're the exception that kind of proves the rule. I mean, whereas Starbucks has been a major success, they studied the culture, etc., a company like Coke has been, okay, they're doing all right. Now they have Cherry Coke with a picture of Warren Buffett that's, and Warren Buffett's considered something of a investment legend even in China. But they're not. It's not a meaningful part of their long-term growth. It's very, very difficult. Again, because of the cultural barriers. So I don't expect a lot of, at least in the immediate future, at least within the next 5, 10, 15 years even, to see a lot of these technology companies going from China to the U.S. and U.S. to China. I think it's going to be a tough nut to crack. But I think in terms of investing, the room for a company like Alibaba, Tencent, or Baidu to grow is just enormous in that country still. I mean, if you consider that the number of malls in China there's one retail mall per over 100 per over 1 million inhabitants. I mean, that's just crying out for an internet presence. Huge internet presence. Alibaba has actually sells more goods in China in a year than Amazon and eBay do together worldwide. I mean, it's an enormous opportunity still with 1.3 billion, and then you throw in these other developing countries. I mean, Pakistan with 180 million, which is basically just getting off the ground. The Philippines. I mean, all these other developing countries, they have tremendous room to grow, and I would recommend the so-called bad combination. Excuse me. And I think that it's basically, really a great opportunity. It doesn't mean that I don't think Amazon is a good stock. I do, and I think that our FANG stocks are very good. But I think that the Chinese stocks may have a little bit more potential, but much more risk because there is political risks there that probably are not here.
What really worries me, Stephen, is that, there's not free and fair competition. There's not free market. So if a U.S. technology company wants to go in and start competing against a Chinese company, the Chinese government may not allow them. They won't get any patent protection. If they want to do an acquisition to get into a Chinese market, I think the Chinese government would block it. And that's not going on in the case of a lot of Chinese companies coming here to the U.S. Look at how Smithfield Pork was allowed to be bought by a Chinese company. And there's other examples of this. So, it looks like there's going to be a lot more. Obviously, you mentioned a number of examples where the Chinese companies did not succeed in European or U.S. markets, but they will have more opportunities to try again. I'm sure they're going to try again. But the U.S., it's not an even playing field. So I think, those Chinese technology companies, they are going to be a good investment because the Chinese government's basically protecting their market share in China and Asia.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, and, even on a best case, yes. I mean, first of all, you're dead right. I mean, the Chinese system of laws and protections, it stinks. It's, they can it's the Wild West. They can, to a large extent, do what they want. Even worse, in a way, is that Apple, I said, has been, fairly successful in China. But one reason they're losing their edge is not so much that the Chinese are telling them, to do this or that, or standing in their way, is because people have been stealing all their ideas and branding them as now Chinese phones. And interestingly, a lot of Chinese exports now are technological electronic goods, and they steal them. I mean, Apple doesn't have any secrets at this point that make their phones unique from Chinese brands. And in some cases, if the Chinese see that, well, let's say photography, or, I'm not that familiar with the, every feature of an iPhone, but if Apple comes out with a brand new feature, let's say touching, the screen makes it do all sorts of things, the Chinese will notice that, and they'll devote sometimes state money to coming up with a better feature. And yes, we have to wake up. This is something we have to wake up to. It's field. It's anything but. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you, but I also agree with your bottom line that the Chinese technology companies are very good investments.
Yeah, I think it's a complicated issue with, whether China's economy, whether their government's doing the right thing for their economy, because I'm a free market guy. I would like an even playing field.
Too.
Let companies compete with better products, better services, let the consumer vote with their money. But it seems like none of these governments are doing that. Trump is threatening tariffs on potentially Chinese goods. We could get into a trade war. There could be currency wars in the future where China can devalue their currency then if Trump puts a VAT tax on it. So, I think we could see that in the future depending upon how Trump wants to play things.
Right. I think that, things have, I mean, China, look, you have to, again, when you start with China, you have to start with a country that basically doesn't have a more moral philosophy that resembles the West. They're not for really free playing fields. They're for everything that will benefit China. And, fortunately, in some regard, that does mean a lot of trade. And, but they would like the trade to be one-sided. If they can't get one-sided trade, they'll settle for, something as close to one-sided as they can get it. They're going to play the game very pragmatically. And they're also going to play it by using, certain dodges. I mean, it's sort of horrifying to me, the way they're using, in my opinion, North Korea. I mean, of course the Chinese could shut down their nuclear capability. I mean, they provide 90% of the food. And who knows, you're telling me that people that can hack into our own government employment, what was it, the OPM, where they stole the records of, I don't know, millions of government employees and everything else, that they can't hack into North Korea, or they can't put a worm into some of these launches? I mean, of course they could. But they're, very, brazenly, in my opinion, using North Korea as some sort of wedge to keep us from, doing anything that would hurt China. I mean, China basically wants control of the Korean Peninsula. We've got to wake up and realize that. And we've got to make our threats a little bit more, I hate to say this, I'm not a warmonger, I hate war, but we've got to make our threats a little bit more real in order to, get them to do something about this. Because, as long as North Korea is there, Japan is basically going to look at China. They're scared of North Korea for good reason. North Korea is developing nuclear arsenal that could, really be a terrible, terrible threat to Japan. And Japan is, guess what? No surprise, is moving closer to China. Centuries of hostilities and everything else between China and Japan is sort of dissipating because of North Korea. And we've got to stop being so naive about this. The Chinese are using North Korea basically as a way of, as a lever, as a way of basically, securing South Korea. Now all of a sudden, South Korea has just elected somebody who is very friendly to China and very friendly to, very willing to make peace with North Korea. I mean, this is not right. We are not playing this game on even terms. That's my point. I think it's your point, too, that, we've got to wake up to what's happening in this world. And it's not very pretty when you look at it in terms of, the extent to which China is winning the game right now. There's just no doubt about it. I mean, don't shoot me, I'm the messenger. But they are beating us, and we've got to wake up. It probably is not too late.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more protectionism going forward, whether it's, Trump talking tough to Mexico or Trump talking tough to China. I want to transition now to China's love of gold. Do you think the Chinese government has a lot more physical gold than the 1,800 tons the People's Bank of China claims to own?
I would bet I would bet many Krugerrands that they do. China, as I said, I think up front has deliberately been accumulating as much gold as they could since 1978, and the folks that have done the most, I think, creative and interesting research on this are the people at Bullion Star. It's a Singapore outfit. I think Koos Jansen is the name of the individual researcher who has really dug into this. And his point is twofold. The amount of gold that China accumulates each year can be measured by withdrawals from the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And that comes to somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 tons, point one. Point two, monetary gold. I mean, that gold actually has to be reported as imports into China. If you import gold into China, China is not allowed to export gold. They can import gold as much as they want, basically. I mean, there was a period of time when they tried to limit imports for, to almost no extent at all. But basically, China can import whatever they want. Exports are not allowed. And this work shows that China basically has been importing, well, if you count their production, which is number one in the world, and you count their imports, it comes to, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 tons or more a year for, I think, about the last 5 or 6 or 7 years. What's interesting here, Jason, is they do not have to declare as imports. It's nowhere. No one knows how much monetary gold is imported. In other words, the imports that are reported are not originally monetary gold. They're not stored by the central bank, though they could be. I mean, the central bank can buy them and make all sorts of exchanges. But the monetary gold, no one has to report it. Basically, China's free, for instance, to go up to, let's say, a mine in Africa, or, there's a lot of gold mines in Africa, and buy the gold for monetary purposes, and never gets reported. So knowing what the Chinese do and knowing the kind of subterfuge that they practice, I think it's extraordinarily naive to think that they don't have massive amounts of gold. And by massive, I mean we have about 8,000 tons, supposedly. I don't know whether we have actually that much, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if they had at least twice as much, and it would only surprise me a little if they had as much as 20,000 tons of gold in that economy, if not, even more than that. Yes, so I think that it's vastly understated, the 1,800 tons that the PBOC controls. They could make a case that they only have 1,800 tons because, other banks would be hiding it, et cetera, but no. In reality, if they want to create a monetary system that centers to some extent around gold, there is very little doubt in my mind that they would have more gold than any other country in the world, and probably any other 3 or 4 countries added together in the world. And they've done this all under cover of darkness. I mean, it's just typical Chinese. They are just fantastically good at disguising and executing what they disguise.
Yeah, it's based on the art of war. I think they have a lot more than 1,800 tons, but they're sovereign.
Yes.
But I think, Stephen, their sovereign wealth funds, and they don't have to disclose this, can go out and take those dollars or treasuries, use those as collateral, and go buy a lot of physical gold on London, the over-the-counter bullion market on the LBMA, or they can go buy it in Switzerland. They wouldn't have to disclose it.
No, they don't have to disclose. I mean, they would. Well, they might have to disclose it if it was imported, but they would not have to disclose it if it was monetary gold that they were paid for, that the PBOC paid them for. So, in other words, they could import monetary gold, and transfer it to the PBOC, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and basically, would never get reported. But in general, they don't have to report. The PBOC could have deals with Rand Gold right now, for all we know, or Barrick. I mean, Barrick has a very, very close relationship with China. Thorson, who runs Barrick, he has schools named after him in Peking University. Oh. I mean, he has a very close relationship. Who knows what China's buying directly from Barrick? Do we know? No, we really don't. I'm not saying that they do or they don't, or from Rand Gold, which is in Africa, or for any number of other foreign gold mines, etc. Anglo-American. I mean, China could be buying directly from the gold mines, the people that are drilling, that are mining the ore, and they could be buying it and finish the mining. And dedicated to monetary gold. It could be just enormous. And you're right about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And it should be counted, incidentally, as part of their reserves. The reserves went down from, I think, near $4 trillion to about $3 trillion, which I don't even believe. I think that basically what they did, none of those numbers make any sense to me. I mean, how can you run current account, how can you run trade balances that amount to about $1 trillion over a long over, let's say, a 4-year period, and then you spend another $1 trillion supporting your yuan? Forget it. I mean, there's not $2 trillion in circulation that would be available to do this. I mean, this is again a result of naivete by the West. China has tons of money. What they could have done is shifted a lot of that money in foreign reserves to actual metals, not just gold, but oil, copper, silver, other things that they're going to need in this vast development program that they've undertook, which now encompasses most of the developing world. But coming back to your original question, there is so little doubt in my mind that China has been accumulating massive amounts of gold. I mean, the real number, whatever it is, I think would stun 99% of the people out there.
When you combine the demand for physical gold from the private sector in China and then the private sector in India, and this is not counting, the Chinese government, all the different entities buying gold, it's 3,000 tons a year. And that's more than the annual mining supply. And yet, Stephen, the gold price, struggles. It barely, on days it goes up, goes up a little bit and then it's smashed back down. We're barely at a gold price right now where a lot of miners can get by. Maybe they're eking out a little profit. We're not at a price where the miners can make money. So are we going to have higher gold and silver prices for the miners and to bring on more supply in the future?
We won't have higher gold and silver prices until China's ready for it. China, again, they'll accumulate as much gold as they can at, lower prices. And I would bet that China is part of their plan is to possibly hold down the price of gold. But when they're ready, I think you're going to see a bull market to end all bull markets. I mean, I think it'll be the greatest bull market of most people's lifetime when, basically gold starts becoming part of a monetary system. I'll tell you, Jason, what I think is the trigger, will be when China starts trading an Eastern benchmark for oil and denominating that benchmark in renminbi, the Chinese currency. And they'll also, that'll be step one. Step two is that they'll start backing the renminbi partially at least, in gold. That is your buy signal. When you see that happen, forget about everything else. Buy gold. Back up any truck, all the trucks you can find, and load it up with gold. Then the cat is out of the sack, or whatever the expression is. They won't be able to hide it anymore. That gold is the future of the world's monetary system. It doesn't necessarily have to be curtains for the dollar or curtains for the United States, but it's going to change the dynamics of the world in a very, very meaningful way. And, cryptocurrencies will have a role in this, and China's already, leading the world in that. I mean, that's one technology China has developed. I mean, it's interesting because that's probably most important to them, because you need highly sophisticated technologies and super fast computers to manage anything to do with cryptocurrencies. And there's no doubt in my mind that, there's no doubt. I mean, look, there's always doubt. But I do think the future monetary system will be sort of like a crypto SDR with gold and maybe other metals included. But the renminbi, no doubt, will have the highest weighting among the fiat currencies, but gold will be will play a central role. And when that happens, you're going to just see gold go. You won't believe the numbers. I'm not going to even give you numbers that I think gold could reach, because you would think I was a lunatic. You want to call the people in the white coats to pick me up. But it's going to be phenomenal, and I wouldn't pay much attention to what's going on in the gold market. If it comes down to 1,200 here, I would just use it as a great buying opportunity. I think we're getting close to that point where China will decide. And this is not, again, I'm not making this up. I mean, they're talking about this. They've been talking about it for the last 3 or 4 years, in fact, and always delaying the date in which they will start trading a Eastern benchmark for oil. And that benchmark for oil, incidentally, will be the most important benchmark in the world, because the demand for oil, whether in China, it's still growing at over 3% a year, but in countries like Pakistan, which have very close relationships with China, in countries like India, where their relationships are not that great, but they're, part of the same part of the world and, tremendous amounts of trade, their oil demand is growing, by 7-8% a year. China's already kind of, their oil demand is sort of not topping out. I mean, the growth rate is slowing down. But these other countries, Pakistan with 180 million people, I mean, they're so, their GDP per capita might be $1,500. I mean, they can continue growing at 7-8% a year if they can solve all this terror and everything else that's around them for the next 20 years. Ditto for India, which has per capita income, who knows? It's very, very, very low. And their growth in oil demand right now is something like 8%. And it will stay very, very high for many, many years to come. So China is going to dominate that market, or basically control the market, by virtue of the fact that they're going to define the benchmark for oil. And that basically leads to, a tremendous amount of control, not only for oil, but for all other metals. I mean, they're looking at the developing world as a basis for, massive trade, massive development, and massive growth, not only for the developing world, but much more important for China itself. That's how they're going to sustain their economy, in my opinion, and they've made a lot of progress in that area.
Yeah, China has set up a new Silk Road trading system there along
exactly
kind of the
right.
old lines of the other Silk Road. They're paying, I think, with Russia for a new train system. The old Siberian, I think they're going to upgrade that as well. But it looks even like China is doing a lot of trade deals with other countries, and they want to settle in RMB for trade settlement. And then they're
exactly
also
right.
And then they're also doing these currency swap deals. So with Venezuela or other natural resource rich countries, they're giving them a line of credit in RMB. If they have valuable natural resources, China's willing to give their governments larger loans than other countries would in exchange for, guaranteed natural resource supply contracts.
You're totally right. And, if you look, one organization which has always caught my eye is the so-called, there are a lot of acronyms here. There's the AIIB for the bank that finances the Silk Road. There's a Silk Road Fund. But the SCO, very under the radar organization. It's called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. China initiated this organization in 1996 with Russia, China, and 3 Central Asian countries. Then I think in 2001, they added another Central Asian country. So there were only, I think, 6 countries. Recently, and I mean really recently, within the last month or less, 2 other countries joined the SCO, Pakistan and India. Now, all of a sudden, you have 8 countries which have an extremely tight relationship with one another. A relationship that not only governs trade, it governs security, it governs, many, many, many different areas. And it accounts for about half the world's population because of China, India, and Russia. No one knows much about this, and there's a very good reason. Because prior to, ever since the organization came into effect in 1996, they granted observer status to countries like Pakistan and India, who are now members. And, a lot of other countries in the developing world also have observer status and may become members of it. They would not grant anything to the Americans. No observer status, nothing. Kept them out of it. No one knows what, I'm not trying to sound like some sort of conspiratorial nut, but I'm just saying, they'll meet once a year and they'll issue a communique, and that'll be what you know about it. But you do know that they're focused on security, trade, and anything else that can knit these countries together. And again, it's an example of Chinese subterfuge. Everyone's looking at the Silk Road, the One Belt, One Road, which I think is terribly important. And will also knit together a whole mass of countries. And also this RCEP, I forget what those initials stand for, but that's the substitute for the TPP. I think Trump actually did make a mistake when he tore up that treaty. He should have tried to negotiate that treaty. It would have given the United States a much greater stake in Asia and the East. Maybe it's not too late. But, you've got to play their own game. You've got to be really, really tough. And you've got to realize you're dealing with people that in the political sphere are sociopaths. They're psychopaths. They have their eye only on one thing and one thing only. They want what's good for China. Have you noticed that China will do business with anybody? from Zimbabwe, where you've got Mugabe, who probably has tertiary syphilis. I mean, who knows? To Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, they don't care what you do to your people. I mean, it doesn't matter to them as long as there's an economic benefit to China. And hopefully it'll be an economic benefit to the country with whom they're doing business, because that'll mean more economic benefit to China. But they have no morals, none. And it's a dangerous situation. And then when you see the SCO, nearly half the world's population knitted around China as a hub, and no one knows what goes on. I mean, you just sort of have to start asking questions. At least I think you do, but I haven't seen anybody asking. And I think someone should start doing it. I mean, we're great at building conspiracies around the trilateral group or whatever, this and that. But the one where, it's really legitimate, where you should have, some real interest in, is this SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's all on the Internet. I'm not saying anything here, Jason, that is speculative. I mean, except, how much gold I think China has accumulated. Some of that's speculative, some of it's not. But SCO, no, it's all over the Internet. You can find it, just that it doesn't make the news in any of the American papers. And it should. It should make it big time.
A lot of these trade deals, Stephen, the reason like TPP and others is that, Trump is listening to his voter base who wanted, at least that's why he didn't agree to TPP, is because, his voter base said stop passing bills like NAFTA because it took away American jobs. So there was, with the NAFTA bill, when it was passed, it was over 1,000 pages. There was all these corrupt crony deals in there, entire lines, paragraphs for, rebates and trade kickbacks for specific corporations. And, a lot of jobs were lost in the United States that were never brought back. So that's probably, obviously, these trade deals, if they can help create new American jobs, maybe then we could do new types of trade deals. But if they're going to be globalists and let the corporations do whatever they want and not bring any new jobs back, then it's a problem. So
right.
It's a complicated issue.
It's very complicated, and I wasn't trying to, say that it was, it should have been, it was, an outright mistake. Yes, there were a lot of good reasons for, there's a lot of good reasons for renegotiating NAFTA. There are a lot of good reasons for, a TPP, but not one that is unfavorable to America, one that would bring back jobs here. And I think that, we could stand very strong and very tough and probably try and negotiate it. If we don't succeed, we don't succeed. But I think that we've got to do something. I don't think that we have a good choice and a bad choice. I think we have a bunch of choices that are not particularly great, and we have to pick the best of that bunch of choices. So eliminating the TPP, yes, there was good reason to do it. I understand it. But I also think that we don't want to eliminate the access that we have to Asian markets, or we don't want to eliminate our access to Asia, our access to the East. And I think we want to negotiate a trade deal. Look, I mean, the other people involved in the trade deal, China was never even involved in the TPP. So I think that negotiating it, around other Eastern countries, with other Eastern countries like Japan, Australia, et cetera, would have been not necessarily horrifying. I think that we could have, tried a little bit harder, and maybe we'll come back to it. But, I'm not going to disagree with anything you're saying. I mean, it's a very, very complicated issue. It really is. And you're absolutely right. Trump's base is what Trump's base is. And, he has to, he has to do what he said he was going to do. And he did it. And I think that maybe it was a little too impulsive. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But I would agree it's very complicated.
Yeah, I'm a libertarian free market guy. Personally, I would like to see none of these governments put up, protectionist trade policies, value-added tax. But the fact of the matter is, when a U.S. company tries to sell goods in a lot of different countries, our goods are taxed. So you can't really sell American cars.
It's horrible.
Yeah, so it's not a level playing field, and a lot of
it isn't.
Yeah. So it's a complicated issue. Yeah, it's a very complicated issue. I would like to uncomplicate it, but, there's so many interests that want to keep it as is because they're making a lot of money off the status quo.
Right. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we're getting screwed. But in a lot of ways. But it doesn't mean that we can't negotiate a trade deal in which we don't get screwed. And I think that that's basically where it should be at, and one that does respect free flow and is adhere to libertarian type principles. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that can be a win-win proposition too. But the trouble is, like you said, there's corruption, there's this, there's that. It's very, very hard to do, and that's sad. It just doesn't give us a lot of good choices. In fact, it gives us no good choices. But the least bad choice might be some trade deal that is, in some sense, there's not these crazy taxes. And not this in some way of preventing the corruption, and some way, and I don't know. You're right. It's complicated, and it's depressing. It really is.
Yeah, I'm just worried about this happened in the 1930s where countries would just retaliate against each other with larger and larger protectionism and tariffs. When one country would put a tariff on their goods, another country would put an retaliatory tariff. So hopefully we don't go down that road. But, the global economy is not doing that well, and it looks like now that things are slowing down, each country is fighting to maintain their share of a shrinking, pie that was growing in the past but is not growing anymore and is shrinking. So, there's going to be more fights over the shrinking pie.
Well, there will be, certainly in the developed world, but I think the developing world is, basically carrying the ball right now, and that's what I think we have to become aware of. I mean, if you look at the economies, the cumulative value of the economies in the developing world is probably greater than the economies in the developed world, and a lot of these economies are growing fairly fast. And I think that, we want, we're still number one in many ways. And I think that we want to have some stake in that, and a stake that favors us, not China. And I think that should be basically what we're doing. I mean, again, I come back to North Korea. Look at they've played us. They've made us think that they have no power over North Korea. I mean, are we kidding ourselves? And they're using North Korea as a wedge to create these relationships with South Korea and to force Japan into the China camp. We've got to wake up. There's a lot we can do or should be doing that is really making our lives in this country much more problematic going forward.
Yeah, and Stephen, have you noticed, for years now, China had been dumping U.S. treasuries, but recently, now that Trump's in office, they've started buying again. So maybe they started buying the treasuries so Trump wouldn't label them a currency manipulator. And
absolutely.
So
I couldn't agree with you more.
So you think that's why they're buying treasuries again? So they're trying to repair the trade relationship then. They don't want tariffs. So this is a way they're going to work together better than they want better trade relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, and they figure from their perspective, every treasury bond they buy is more leverage that they have on America. And, I don't like it one bit. I mean, I really don't. I just think that we have to view China as extremely intelligent, extremely savvy, but also as sociopathic in terms of what they're willing to do to accomplish their goals. And as a very it's a troubling situation. I think that you really I can't say for sure that they had an agreement among the the 9 people that make up their Politburo to start buying U.S. Treasuries as a way of warding off any protectionist feelings that Trump may have. But it certainly makes sense. It's not something that you can rule out. It's something that we have to be aware of. I'm not saying to, go crazy on things like this, but be aware. Our government has to be aware. No, I agree with you. I mean, what you were saying, I would take your side in the debate. I really would. That they're buying this stuff for, to convince Trump and everyone else that they're really good. They like the U.S., et cetera. They don't. I mean, really, that's silly stuff.
Yeah,
they don't.
U.S.-China trade relations, Stephen, are going to be something we're going to have to follow going forward. I have a lot of other great questions for you. We're right under an hour right now. We're not going to be able to get to them. I have them saved. So we'll have you back on the show again in the near future, and we'll talk about the other questions that I was going to ask you about China. But I want to thank you again for your time today. And if our listeners want to follow your work or maybe pre-order your new book, how do they do so?
Well, I guess they can go to the ID website, and they'll find, my publications. I mean, that would be, or they can go to leeb.com and find, our publications and, what we do offer. And as far as my books, the new one's not out yet. Probably won't be out for another, hopefully 6 to 9 months. But past books that I've written, Amazon is the best way. Some of them are for free because they've been in print for, 15 years. So whatever. I mean,
I'll put a link to your Amazon page with all your different books on there. You've been a prolific writer. You've been in the newsletter business since the 70s?
Yeah, I don't even want to admit that, but I mean, I started my own. You made me. You gave away my secrets. Yes, I've been longer than you've been on this earth. I've been writing about this stuff. That I'm sure of.
Well, I want to thank you again for your time today, Stephen, and I really enjoyed the discussion, and we'll have to have you back on in the future to talk about China as more news comes out.
Would love to. I really appreciated it, and I want to say I really learned something from our discussion today, Jason, and I thank you very much for that.
Wall Street for Main Street needs your help. YouTube stole $7,200 from Wall Street for Main Street in annualized YouTube AdWords revenues, and they kneecapped our analytics down by more than 80% across the board since September 2016 with their new censorship algorithms to stop the rapid growth of our channel. That was money we could have used to upgrade our website, pay bills, and invest in improving our content and growing our business. Our audience of loyal listeners is all over the globe and so large now that if most or all of our listeners were to commit to donating $1 to $5 each month to our Patreon account, we could easily meet our goal on Patreon. Wall Street for Main Street also accepts one-time donations on our main wallstreetformainstreet.com website. That's WALLSTFORMAINST.com website via PayPal, Gold Money, or Bitcoin. We also accept donations of physical precious metals that can be mailed to us. Thanks to all listeners who have already made a donation, and thanks in advance to any listeners who make a future donation or contribution to the growth, improvement, and success of Wall Street for Main Street.